Welcome back. This is Salam Media and Takolia, and I'll be with you until about 9 p.m. tonight, inshallah. This is Friday Night Live with me, ST. Welcome to you, wherever you are tuning in, streaming in via the Salam Media website on www.salammedia.com/. listen-live, as well as the Salam Media app. You can download the TuneIn app and stream, as well as on Facebook and the YouTube channel. Don't forget to click like and click subscribe as well on that platform there as well. It's now 20 minutes to 8 p.m. here in Johannesburg. It's a moderate Friday evening, alhamdulillah. Great show, and time now for our Tech Talk segment. So tonight on the Tech Talk segment, we are talking about radiation from cellular towers versus your mobile devices, and these things obviously all emit radiation. However, having said that, also radiation is given off from 5G masts, etc., and we're now in the fourth IR, and the process in the mobilization of all of this. This is what I want to highlight and discuss. So on the line, we are now going to be joined by Jan Vermeulen in a moment or so. Obviously, as mobile phone services have grown in popularity and more cellular masts are being put up where people live and work, protests against cellular towers have also begun to grow. Some were concerned about how unsightingly the towers, while others were campaigning against towers due to warnings that cellular networks emit potentially deadly electromagnetic radiation. In South Africa, such a protest we've seen in 2010 when residents of Craighaven campaigned against the erection of an I-burst tower in the area. And there were similar issues when 4G was starting to roll out in South Africa, and now with 5G as well. To talk to us more on these talking points, we welcome Jan Vermeulen to the program, a senior journalist at MyBroadband. Jan Vermeulen. Good evening, Jan. Welcome once again to the program.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you with us, and thanks for also taking the time out of your busy Friday evening. We know, obviously, we were discussing in our pre-interview, travel and just the whole COVID situation. Yeah, man, it's just so hectic. I'm streaming in so many guests from a different perspective. Being in studio, used to having in-studio guests. Now, almost every segment we do, even on mainstream platform and media, is now online. It's such a change to the environment, and coming from a journalism, broadcasting background and perspective, it changes the whole dynamic. Jan, tonight our talking point, and as I just mentioned a few moments ago regarding mobile phone devices growing in popularity as more cellular masts were being put up, there were protests. Let's talk about some of these protests. I mean, we've seen these protests happen in 2010 around the Craighaven area, that's here in Johannesburg North. They were protesting against an I-burst, and when I saw the name I-burst, it made me go back way into like 2008, 2012, around that time there when I was just starting off in the telecoms industry. And remember I-burst? When last have I even seen that name? But anyway,
yes.
Now
I-burst, for interest's sake, for those who might be interested, I-burst was eventually bought up by a company called Multisource. And Multisource was eventually bought up by a holding company that turned it into Rain. So I-burst still exists, but it's become Rain, and all the I-burst technology towers have been converted into LTE towers.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's great to obviously know. I mean, and Rain is, raining, as we see. Many people are subscribing. Some are liking the services, some aren't. But anyway, that's a different discussion. Talking tonight, the talking point is around some of these protests. Now, radiation from cellular towers versus a mobile device or a peripheral like your tablet, etc. And also there's radiation from 5G masts, and we've seen some of these 5G masts rolled out across Europe, the USA, Asia Pacific region. It's being rolled out in Africa. First things first, right? The protests that were happening closer towards the time in 2010 around the Craighaven area were about the emissions of potentially deadly electromagnetic radiation. Let's firstly break down that word in a brief sum for those
Sure.
who don't know what's exactly electromagnetic radiation. You
Yes,
might hear
and
we can see. It's
yeah,
different
and
with an EMP.
yes,
They might
yes,
mistake it for it. So let's
and it's
talk about that.
different from where you might associate the word radiation. And so this is the thing, is that there's a big misunderstanding around the word radiation. And the second people see the word radiation, they think nukes. They think
Yeah.
nuclear power.
Yeah.
And maybe if you've watched one too many cartoons in your life, you might be thinking of the Fantastic Four and gamma radiation and every other superhero in the Marvel
Yes.
universe
Gamma
has got
rays.
superpower. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. The Hulk that got his powers from anyway. So, our minds, when we hear the word radiation, immediately goes to danger. But that's not necessarily the case, because we've been living with electromagnetic radiation around us for decades, even over a century, since the invention of radio. And in fact, there's actually electromagnetic radiation around us, weaker electromagnetic radiation than that, but around us all the time, just because of the planet that we live on and the universe that we live in. This electromagnetism ranges from the very, very low frequency pulses that we see in low frequency radio. And if you're looking at power coming over like normal power from the AC socket in the wall, that runs at 50 hertz, right? Very slow.
Right.
Then you've got visible light. So like just light from the sun and from the light bulbs that are illuminating us right now, that's a form of electromagnetic radiation. And so when we're talking about, if we want to, the stuff that people are freaking out about, perhaps we should be more specific and call that radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. So that's radiation due to waves that fall in the radio frequency bands, right? But once again, those are nothing new. We've had radio since the 1800s. We've had AM radio, FM radio.
Now those frequencies, they've been airborne since the advent of the radio and radio broadcasts, etc. But it's just been, hyped up and technologically advanced, and it's become a bit more dangerous, perhaps, as time has gone by.
So this is the thing. No. So this is the thing. Yeah. So this is the thing. So there's like a higher frequency radiation than radio frequencies called microwave, but microwave is still lower frequency than visible light, right? But now here's the thing: is all this talk I've just done about frequency, it's all hogwash. Like this is the kind of talk that you will hear from conspiracy theorists all the time, freaking you out about frequency. But frequency is only one half of the equation, and it's not even the really, really important part. The most important part when we're talking about electromagnetic radiation is power. And there is a relationship between power and frequency, but curiously, the higher the frequency goes, generally, the higher the power can go. Because in terms of like the human skin, for example, the higher the frequency goes, the more your skin will reflect that frequency out. You won't actually absorb it. You will reflect it back out. Right. So this is a phenomenon we see in cellular technology all the time. And I'll try to get back to that and explain it a little bit. But the crux of the story I want to tell here is think about power. And that's the article that I did was about measuring the power that comes from a cellular mast versus a cell phone versus a Wi-Fi router, to kind of gauge how much radiation you are being bombarded with by these different things. And so that was the purpose of the article, was to measure power. Power is the thing that we should worry about.
You guys have driven various towns and provinces and whatever the case is, and you've, I would say, compiled a list or a report of performance testing on, 5G and 4G. So let's look at it from the South African geographical perspective. the testing that were done, technological hubs, I'd say, I have more faster speed and more versatile equipment, etc., teams out to support these infrastructures as opposed to remote support and remote line of sights, if I may. What were some of the findings that you found, and where are we exceeding, and where are we, let's say, lagging, and where are we behind in terms of this? Where do you think more work is needed across some of your visits and your tests?
Sure. So we're actually doing surprisingly well in South Africa. The thing is, I understand that that's a controversial thing to say, because there's always going to be at least 5 callers out of a whole listenership that are having problems inside their houses, and that's the unfortunate nature of cellular technology. So maybe if I can twist your question a little bit, right? Where we are not doing well in South Africa is the fact that we are relying on cellular networks for our day-to-day internet connectivity, right? That should be coming over a line. That should be coming over a fiber or some kind of fixed line, right? We're getting rid of copper in South Africa entirely. The copper's kind of got a second lease of on life with Telkom now during the lockdown. But like that's where we need to be going is fiber fiber is being rolled out widely, but really it could do with some more support from government. And then the funny thing is that all these concerns about the lack of competition, or that people feel that there's not enough competition in the cellular space, that Vodacom and MTN's prices are too high because of a lack of competition, even though Telkom and Cell C is competing against them. If you put fiber into areas where people can only get internet over cellular networks, the fiber is actually going to be competing against the likes of Vodacom and MTN, and it's going to be providing faster, more reliable services at lower prices and giving you sort of the option of a reliable, uncapped connection. So yes, while there are areas of South Africa where there's spotty coverage and where Vodacom, MTN, Cell C, Telkom can improve their performance and their coverage and all that stuff, really there's a larger issue here, and that's that we really need to be moving to a place as a country where mobile networks are used for what mobile networks are good for, and we use fixed line networks for what fixed line networks are good for. And if we can incentivize the rollout of fixed line, then that would help drive down the cost to communicate in South Africa significantly. If people can just have their own Wi-Fi at home for a fraction of the cost that a mobile data connection would cost them.
Now you talk about and as I was mentioning, you highlighted fiber and versus our mobile trend in South Africa, where people are streaming and using the internet over mobile services. Incentivizing the rollout of this fiber technology to vast areas of the country. Some areas are very far out and remote, like a place like, let's say, Hoedspruit or Arkonhoek out up north, versus a place like Johannesburg and a place maybe like St. Francis Bay, etc. How do you incentivize, and what would be a turning point, or what would be an enticing point for me as a mobile operator? Why would I find demand in this area, and why roll out this? Whereas I can use let's say I'm a company and I've got a mobile division and I've got a fixed line service that I can offer. Where do we draw the line from a feasibility perspective? At the end of the day, business is business.
Right. So here's the thing about South Africa's fixed line industry today. It is incredibly vibrant and incredibly competitive right now. Yes, for a big fiber provider, rolling out to a small town in the Northern Cape is maybe not that attractive. But if there are tax incentives, if there are government grants to be had, all kinds of things to offset the initial rollout costs and perhaps some of the maintenance costs, a smaller player, even larger players, if the incentives are good enough, A smaller player might look at that and go, hang on a second, I, as a small player, can effectively do this rollout at almost no upfront cost. Well, at no real cost, right? I get the loan from the bank, I roll it out, I get the government grant, I pay off the loan, and then I've effectively rolled out that infrastructure to that town for zero money. And now, you know, I can just charge them normal rates and make normal profits off of that rollout. I don't have to worry about recouping, you know, so much of my initial rollout costs and all that stuff. So there's hordes of things that can be done from a cost mitigation perspective there. The challenge is going to be for government to continue encouraging those lines to be looked after and maintained, because government did try to incentivize the rollout of good old-fashioned Telkom telephone lines to remote areas in South Africa, and because it wasn't properly incentivized, you know, the rollouts happened so that Telkom could meet its universal service obligations, but those lines were not properly maintained. They fell into disrepair. There wasn't huge uptake in those areas. And so, you know, that was almost effort wasted. So that's now, you know, the flip side of it. But there's the way to make sure that the effort isn't wasted is to make it so that the service is affordable enough for the people from that small town that they'll actually go, yes, this is something that's worth my while. It'll be much cheaper to do it this way than to buy, you know, 10 gigs of mobile data a month, or 5 gigs or 2 gigs or whatever people can afford in that area. It's actually cheaper for me to take up this basic fiber package. So let's do that. And then I get a better experience. And the net effect of that, it's difficult to actually quantify, but, you know, you look at studies like the famous one from the World Bank that was done that shows that an increase in internet penetration like that increases the GDP of a country, right? So like almost on a one-to-one basis, a percentage point increase in internet penetration goes to a percentage point, not quite, but like, you know, if you increase it by a lot, I think it plateaus and goes down a bit. But the fact is that that is a very easy way to increase GDP in a country. If you want economic growth, roll out internet.
Now, talk about economic growth, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, the fiber model versus obviously the trend of people now using mobile devices for internet purposes. Let's talk about the decade 2010, 2020. You know, we've moved from analog to digital. We've seen, you know, 4G, we've seen 5G, we've seen LTE in that period now. Profitability also comes into play. Right now, as a mobile operator or a ISP, a service provider, or an SP, a service provider in that regard, what would be the market focusing on right now from a sales perspective? Where do you see, because if you drive on the M1 highway, for example, passing Ethel Oaklands, you take a drive along maybe the N12, you're going to see a Wairu Link billboard maybe somewhere out towards Klerksdorp. Closer towards Midrand, you're going to see, and I'm not just saying it because Vodacom is there, but maybe you'll see MTN, or you'll see Liquid Telecom, for example, saying put in 5G. And on the other hand, you've got in a smaller town fiber. What would the market now and the companies be focusing on for a profitable sales or solution package? What would solution architects be focusing on right now in this period?
So on the mobile side, what the companies are pushing for heavily, which will increase their profitability, is more spectrum, right? And so that part of the equation there is, they say, you know, if it's easier for us to roll out more capacity, which means the way it increases profitability is by reducing costs, right? So it's not like they make more money, it's that they don't spend as much money to roll out their network. And so that's an easy way for them to increase profitability. And then the flip side of that, and what we've been promised, we'll see if it happens, is the prices come down, right? Now, I'm hearing all kinds of talk. Now, there's a lot of, now part of the reason about the fear over radiation on 5G is part of it's weirdly, the propaganda that OEMs themselves put out over 5G. You know, they're talking about using millimeter wavelengths and things from 6 gigahertz to 60 gigahertz to like 300 gigahertz signals and all that stuff. And that's got people running scared, even though it really shouldn't. But the fact is that 5G as it is today is not really living up to that hype. They're not really rolling out on these super high frequencies yet. It's not practical to. Now, the reason I mention that is because there's also a lot of hype in 5G around the fact that it can be this competitor, this wireless competitor to fiber. And there's talk of really strange things in the technology that we've not seen before in 2G, 3G, 4G, right? It's called network slicing, where, you know, they're able to customize the quality of service on the network depending on the end customer, right? And so that might be a way to improve profitability. If you can sort of go, okay, great, for like the average consumer, I am going to offer this level of quality of service that's not quite as good as for like a big enterprise. And so then I'll be able to charge 2 different rates for those 2 different qualities of service. This is not unusual. We've seen that happen in the fixed line space, right? You can get basic uncapped, or you can get premium uncapped, or business uncapped, right? And stuff like that. So, but you know, network slicing speaks to more than that. There's all, you know, like, but the fact is, no one's figured it out. No one has really figured out what this network slicing feature on 5G is really going to mean for business. And so certainly if I were in the mobile space, that is somewhere I would be looking to see if there's really value to be had there, or if it's all hype. Fixed line is an entirely different animal. In South Africa, there's more work than there are people doing the work. Even during lockdown, right? There's so much pent-up demand for fiber in South Africa that it's going to take at least another couple of years for that basic demand to be fully serviced. And then we're not even talking about dealing with outlying areas where people still want fiber, but you know, the population isn't that dense, and so there might be lower priority. And so what a network planner is going to be looking at in fixed line is going to be very different to what a network planner is and business developer is looking at in mobile.
You mentioned something important here regarding, you know, mobile and the focus of the mobile ISPs right now versus obviously fixed line and fixed line industry earlier on in our discussion. In conclusion, we could go on. Unfortunately, I do need to wrap the segment though. But I want to ask about something. The Vision 2030 now, right, that everyone is pushing forward towards, and we seen so much in the media space around it, and you know, the propaganda or the agenda, whatever it is.
Yeah.
From a technological perspective, what can we expect in this next decade? The last decade, 2010, 2020, we've discussed now 4G, analog, digital, 4IR, 5G. What do you see us moving in towards, in a nutshell, if you can conclude on that point, from here till 2030? What do you see on the cards?
Yeah. So obviously, faster, more reliable networks. And by the way, there's a whole separate section to these networks that we haven't even mentioned, which is the wireless ISP, not the mobile ISP, but the wide links that you mentioned that run over Wi-Fi rather than the frequencies that cellular networks operate on. But for the next 10 years, it's a tricky one. Predicting 10 years out is difficult. Things could, if you believe the sci-fi that we produced back in the 90s, by now we would each have a robot companion, have AIs implanted into our heads. We'd probably be living, or maybe we'd be living on Mars. You know, have spaceships. light, who knows? So 2030
Yeah.
could very well be sort of like this quantum leap that we've gone forward, where we've got neural interfaces in our brains to help, to improve just human intellect, right? To implant an extra computer in your head to improve the human intellect. Maybe we're at a stage where we're like wirelessly connecting to the internet individually wherever we are, which we are already. You've got a phone in your pocket that's already able to do that. But what I mean is seamlessly, right? So you've got, biological augments to help you do that. It's like something out of a game like Deus Ex, right? It's
right.
but
Deus
it
Ex,
could
what
also,
a game. Oh,
yeah,
man.
but it could also just not be that, right? It could also be like we could also be looking at far more ordinary progress, like we have seen between 2010 and 2020. I would love to see at least autonomous cars to get rid of the road deaths on our roads in South Africa. That would be lovely. Autonomous freight, it's going to cost jobs, right? It's going to cost the jobs of drivers. And so the other half of that is to use this as an opportunity to create more jobs in South Africa than we lose, because we're looking at record unemployment. And so certainly what I'm hoping for is that with ubiquitous connectivity, make it and affordable connectivity, and perhaps even universal basic access, right? That if we're able to achieve that in South Africa in the next 10 years, hopefully we'll be able to also bring down our unemployment rate, and especially our youth unemployment rate, proportionally.
I think that's a very important aspect. It's something we need to look at. But yeah, Jan, unfortunately, that's all we have the time for, man. We could go on. There's so many talking points. I want to talk about gaming in the next 5 or 10 years. But hey, we'll talk about that. Jan Vermeulen, thank you so much once again for your time this evening. Always a pleasure having you here on the show. Have a fantastic weekend, and until we chat again, take care, Jan.
You too. Have a good day. Cheers.
Bye-bye. That's Jan Vermeulen, senior journalist at MyBroadband Radiation. Radiation emitted from your cellular towers versus your mobile devices, and also versus your fiber and your Wi-Fi modems at home. And hoping you've learned a bit about electromagnetic radiation, and these types of talking points were discussed, and also radio frequencies, radiation in terms of that, fiber. And we've also heard, regarding that mobile users are utilizing the internet more from their mobile devices, as opposed to people using fiber at homes, etc. in that regard. Anyway, it's just after 5 minutes after 8 p.m. We take in an ad break, and when we come back, we are going to be speaking to Faisal Suleiman from Amal. That and more still to come. Don't forget also, we are going to be speaking to Highlands Park goalkeeper Craig Itafia. That and more still to come. Stay tuned. This is Salam Media. We'll be back after this.